Hey, we're journeying through the book of Ephesians. This is our last chapter, chapter 6. Well, almost, except we have to back up because last week we made it as far as chapter 5, verse 22. And those two words that scared us all, wives, submit. And so we just had the benediction and left. We've come back and we're going to pick up where we left off. And we've let the campus empty out to the mountains there in Mountain Church today. Fantastic. We're going to take this opportunity to just be unabashed and cogent with the Word of God. Ephesians chapter 5. But I wonder if, in introduction, I could say this, that it may be that Paul is describing something here in Ephesians, starting in Ephesians chapter 5, going through Ephesians chapter 6, that he is wanting to put the gospel in real shoes. He wants us to live it out in real life. And relationships are life. And so he begins to spell it out in Ephesians chapter 5 and on through verse 6. On the front of your bulletin under the welcome section, you'll notice these words from Kathleen Norris. It is the daily tasks, daily acts of love, that's relationships and worship that serve to remind us that religion is not strictly an intellectual pursuit. Christian faith is a way of life, not an impregnable fortress made up of ideas, not a philosophy, not a grocery list of beliefs. It's real life. And Paul, I believe, is going there. Thank you, Tony. Each week, we've had one of our brightest minds, teachers or students from our campus, lead us into a classroom commentary. And Judah Hammond, thank you for taking today.
Okay, so I will be doing chapter 6, the commentator. Okay. Okay, so first it starts out in the chapter and saying, children, obey your parents and trust them. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, respect your parents, because if you respect them, you trust their decisions. Like when I did this, I just wanted to do a little speech and it was done, but my mom's like, no, you should do a PowerPoint. My dad had other ideas too, and probably was the right thing, probably. Okay. But then, after my parents showed me that, I saw a little bit down. Parents, do not exasperate your children. Instead, raise them up in a godly manner. So, I put that back at them, too. And for this slide also, instead of yelling at your children, talk to them quietly and meaningful, like they will later hopefully do in their life also. Okay, then it goes down to 6:5 through 8, and it's slaves, serve your masters as if working for the Lord. And even though life might not be fair, work without getting mad or other things. Instead, work out with all your heart, because then God says later that they'll be rewarded in heaven for their good work. Okay, masters, treat your slaves the same way. So I was thinking, and if people rank below you and you're the master, treat them if they rank above you. That's how you should live your life. Okay, now we start getting on the middle part of the chapter, 6:14. And it first talks about the belt of truth. So in tough situations, and it's hard to be truthful, look down your waist and imagine not just the belt of truth, but God in helping you being truthful. Then it goes down and talks about the breastplate of righteousness. Again, if you're wavering at being righteous, look down at your chest and imagine that the breastplate of God is there and He's protecting you from the evil one. And then you get to the feet, the shoes of life, and that's what carries you through life. And so if you're struggling with think about quitting the race that God set before you, look down on your feet and imagine they're a super tool for running races far bigger than marathons. They're a tool to carry the message of peace. through nations. Okay. Then it's a very interesting chapter. So, in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith to extinguish the flaming arrows at the evil one. So when deadly arrows are pointed at you, raise your shield, the Bible, shout victory, shout, for who can defeat our God? And he'll protect us. So, it talks about the helmet and the sword in the same one. So take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So a helmet is not a weapon, instead it's protection from the evil one. But the sword is our one and only weapon and purpose to send the Bible truth to nations. And like God will fight for us and his Spirit will fight for us. So I thought that was cool. And at the last part of the chapter, it's Paul talking to the people of Ephesus, saying, peace to the brethren and love with the Father, and love with faith from God the Father, the Lord Jesus Christ. So this is Paul saying goodbye to the people of Ephesus, but to keep the faith of God in Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Judah. Thank you very much, man. Let me take the microphone. And I'm done. Thank you, Judah. Before we open our Bibles, I want us to begin with a presupposition, an a priori, that what Paul is covering in Ephesians, the end of Ephesians chapter 5 and Ephesians chapter 6, we often read it with this knee-jerk response that Paul is dealing with a very cultural context, a very limited situation, something that was probably understood by his hearers in a way that we can't understand. And even commentaries, scholars will lend their voices to this, saying, it's really hard to apply what Paul is talking about to us because it's very focused on their culture. But I insist that we begin with this a priori, this presupposition that what Paul said was as just an affront to their culture as it is to ours. That is, they hear it and say, if they were to have the option, they would say, well, good thing Paul is writing to the people in 2016 because it has nothing on us. The culture was so contrary to what Paul was pointed at what Paul's agenda was at communicating Ephesians chapter 5 and Ephesians chapter 6. It was an affront, not only to the pagan, but to the monotheistic mind. So we go to Ephesians chapter 5 with that understanding, because otherwise we write it off. Those people of Ephesus, they really ought to, whatever it meant, they need to understand it. But not so. It was such an affront to their culture as well. And non-biblical examples bear this out. This wasn't in line with what they thought. So let's go. Ephesians chapter 5, picking up the very end. Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going to actually back up to verse 21. Paul, in essence, starts in Ephesians chapter 5 with outlining 5 relationships that you and I experience. Every one of us experienced these 5 relationships. And Paul outlines these. So we're going to outline them as Paul did. And taking our cue from Paul, he spends the majority of his time on the first 2. And then moves forward. So we'll spend the majority of our time on the first 2 and then rapidly move forward to the 5th and final relationship. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. Comes in the context, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 18, 19, and 20, describe this worship context, singing songs, encouraging one another. And then it gets to verse 21 and it says, in that context, in what context? In the context of a worshiping community, do what? Submitting, verse 21, one to another in the fear of God. Relationship number one is relationship in the church. That was Paul's first relationship. He says, look, as you come together, as you worship together, submit to one another. Woo! Read that to a board or a committee. Submitting to one another in the fear of God. All of a sudden, Paul brings this worshiping community together and says, you're stuck with each other. You don't have permission to exit. He goes on, he makes it even stronger. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church. We'll get back to the husband and the wives part. Just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Gave himself for her. This line, gave himself for her. Why did Christ die? Why did Jesus die? He died to raise up a community. Oh, he would have died for just one if that's all he had for a community. But if there are two, he's going to bring those two together. Christ died to form a community. Verse 30, we are members of his body, of his flesh and of his bones. He says not only did Christ die for the church, not only did he raise it up through his death and resurrection, but this church, this body of believers is considered part of the body of Christ. His bones and his flesh, it's him. One more, verse 31, 32. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And then Paul says, okay, I'm talking about marriage there, but this is a great mystery. But I speak concerning Christ and the church, that Christ regards the church as a man should his wife. Beloved, we are afraid to use this kind of language in ecclesiology today. We don't talk about church like this. It sounds controlling. It sounds authoritative. It sounds biblical. And I apologize if my habits of undressing up front have traumatized you last week and this week. But I'm going to take off my coat and I'm going to sit down because I want this to be so non-pastoral. All right? We're just talking. But the Pauline theology, that is what Paul believes God believes, is that we cannot separate God from the church. It's his body, flesh and bones of Christ. Therefore, it's an oxymoron for one to say, I am a committed follower of the Christ and not to be committed to the church. That's why I took off my coat, because this sounds like a paid speech. Paid for by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. No. This is Pauline, this is biblical theology. That Christ is so connected to his church. It is so near and dear to his heart. He gave his life for it. And for one of us to say, you know what, I can't, I don't have time or resources for the church, but I'm not leaving God. You're only fooling yourself. I'm only kidding myself. To consider myself recklessly committed to Christ without being recklessly committed to the church. All right, the rest of the sermon's easy. No, not really, because the very next relationship Paul talks about is in verse 22. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Wives, submit. Wives, submit. That line right there, it's odd for our, it seems antiquated. And here's the rub, that we often consider ourselves more biblically advanced or intellectually advanced or culturally advanced than was Paul and his culture. Like Paul wouldn't say the same thing today as he did then. What do we become? We become, in essence, the authority above Paul. No, if Paul was the preacher, he wouldn't say that. All right, stick with this. Because you know what comes next, verse 25, right? Husbands. We're going to underline that, right? Husbands, love your wives. Oh, it gets better. Just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. Paul's not lopsided. Paul's not lopsided when he said, wives, submit. He comes back with this, but husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. And how did he love? He gave his life for it. He was willing to give up his eternity for the sake of her eternity. We, pardon my chicken scratch, but when we read this, we often view it like this. Well, let's give her a little skirt there. We often view it as this. Says so in the Bible. Wives, submit to your husbands. Paul's setting us up because this picture is not at all what Paul had in his mind. And we react to this, wives submit. It's not our culture. This equality. Where's equality in this? Paul's dealing with a totally different culture. You're right. And to that culture, it was an affront, what he said also. Maybe Paul wasn't looking at this picture when he said, wives, submit to your husbands. And then he said, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. So in this picture, where's the man? He's down here. Because he has given his life for his wife. What else does she have to do but to look down because he's there, giving his life for her? Now, how come there was like 4 amens on the submit part and like none on the man laying under this awkward drawing? This is what Paul's thinking. Because in his mind's eye, Paul is seeing this. And he says, I want you to take this, and I want you to live it out in your homes. As Christ died to birth the church, I want the husband to lay down his life for the wife. And then what does the church do forever after that? The church submits to the will of the one who died for her. I just flew back from Zambia. Been to Africa many times, but I experienced something new. So I was there speaking for a camp meeting, housed in a very nice place. I mean, it was just very generous of these people. And the first evening I was there, flew in on a Friday. First evening I was there, preparing for Sabbath. One of the ladies set to take care of the speakers for the camp meeting came in. I'm sitting there in the living room area, the sitting area, and she comes in and gets on her knees before me. That was different. All right? Outside of our own home, I've never had, no, just kidding. I've tried to get down so that we could talk. She just wanted to ask what I needed. A week later, okay, this was the normal part of the normal conversation. A week later, one of the most beautiful sights, one of the most almost sacred moments of my time there. Sabbath afternoon, I'm headed back to the camp meeting to speak one last time, and I look across the lawn. There had been people gathered to eat at this home. I look across the lawn, and there's an elderly, very elegant man. He's sitting there, and a young 20-something girl had something to say to him. And as she walked over to where he was seated, right? Let's work on that. She knelt down, and he looked down into her face and took her hand in his. No relation. This wasn't son or daughter. But whatever their conversation was, that was what I saw in the rearview mirror. Not one of you forced me to be here. I have to. No, but one of, I respect you, I honor you. And in turn, he reached out, held her face. Now, I know, this is not Paul's theology, the bowing, the kneeling, but our culture reacts to this to say, what in the nerve to say that women have to submit to men? This is unconstitutional. But what if it's not? What if we only think of it one way? This whole submitting brings us, it's always read in the pejorative, but what if it's meant to bring honor and respect to one who would die for you? Well, it's not so bad. Yeah, this will help us. Paul summarizes these two verses. He brings them into one. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself. And let the wife see. And then he substitutes. He takes out that word submit and he inserts the word respect her husband. Maybe that's helpful. Because submit is very heavy for us. It's very, very negative. But Paul says, hey, let me summarize this for you. Let each man love his own wife as he loves himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. The expression of love, by the way, this agape love that Paul uses is unconditional love. And in the context, it then calls forth unconditional respect. Because here's the conversations we have. Well, if you knew who I had to live with, you wouldn't respect him either. It's not a question. It's not an option. Unconditional respect. As it is, if you knew my wife and some of her bad habits, there's parts of no. It's unconditional. That is, it's not dependent on the other person. It is absolutely not dependent on the other person. It is love, love, love with all your life, and she is to respect. Now, what about this love and respect? You know the volume published by Dr. Emerson Eggerichs, Love and Respect. He points out the differences, that they are as real as we sit here. There's the difference of love. There's the difference of respect. And Dr. Eggerichs argues that oftentimes we have been very heavy focused on this idea of love. Hey, love in a marriage relationship. And we haven't talked a whole lot about this word or this idea of respect. But he says, look, in his years of counseling, he has come to conclude that there is a difference in what a husband wants and what a wife wants. Put his words on the screen for you. He says, the wife is the one who asks. If it's not out loud, she asks in the realm of her own mind, does my husband love me as much as I love him? Don't raise your hand, but I imagine if Emerson is right, that there are a large number of wives who said, yeah, I've asked that question. Does my husband love me as much as I love him? Men don't ask that question. Emerson said, Dr. Egerich says, he said, I've often asked the husband, does your wife love you? And the reply is, of course. Yeah, I don't really question that. But then he says, then I ask, does she like you? And the answer usually comes back, no, I don't necessarily think she likes me. I know she loves me. And I know women right now, you're like, who published that book? Right? But some of us guys are going, no, I track with that. I believe she loves me, but does she like who I am? I don't know. And this, Dr. Egerich says, is the difference. Love is a sensitive, caring, I'm here to care for you and love you and support you. And this respect is this liking. I admire who you are. I honor you. I approve of you. And immediately the wife says, ooh, but if I say I approve, I mean, he does this and I don't approve. But what are you communicating? Okay, so Dr. Egerich says, here's some tests you can, I say, hey, try these tests. Try these in your home. Men, try this. Love your wives. That's what she wants. That's what she needs. That's what she was created for. So say I love you, whisper it, write it, text it, act it out, however you want. But quadruple your expression of I love you. So if you say it one time a day, say it 4 times a day. If you say it once a month, then you need to do it a whole lot more, okay? Quadruple your expression of love and see what happens. I dare you. Ladies, we're different. We're different. If you were to walk into the room, your husband, you come into the house, your husband's trying to glue on a leg of a chair that fell off or something, he's working there, and you walk into the room and you say, I love you, he will likely say what? I love you too. End of conversation. You move on, he moves on. It's done. Walk into that same room, he's, and you say, sweetie, I have such respect for you. Two things will happen, Egerich says. 2 things will happen. 1, he will follow you out of the room and say, exactly what did you mean by what? Or if he's lazy, he'll just stay there and yell at you. Hey, what do you respect about me? Try it. Try it, I dare you. There's love and respect. Read through a couple of books this last week. Nina Rosner's book, The Respect Dare, and then Alex and Stephen Kendrick's book, The Love Dare. Both are written for a 40-day dare on how to love your wife or respect your husband. So I've got three just simple, practical. I don't want to overwork your marriage relationship, all right? So just 3. 3 things to throw out. Number 1, your words, my words. Every time we speak of our spouse, you are giving him or her a reference. So, respect to a husband looks a lot like this. Husband steps into the room, you and your friends are hanging out doing something, and he offers to take the kids to the park so that you have more time to talk. What you say next is respect or disrespect. He says, hey, honey, I'll take the kids to the park. He exits with the kids, and while the door is shutting, you say, he never does that. Disrespect. Or you say, and that may be the truth, but you say, that's my man. And he hears that as he walks out the door. That's right. That's right. And I'm going to take the kids to the park next time. But we say, no, that's not honest. I need to just say it like it is. Ladies, don't be fooled. He doesn't do that on a normal basis. No. Yeah, love looks a lot like this. You have a family over. Someone says, hey, your wife is an amazing cook. What you say next is love. Say, yeah, I don't get this kind of food very often. Or you can say, you haven't seen anything. What you say is respect or love. How about your time? Your husband comes home an hour late. The last thing his boss or coworkers say to him is probably something like, hey man, we appreciate you. We appreciate you putting in the extra time. Thanks for coming through for us, man. You're a hard worker. The first thing his wife says is, what's the matter with you, boy? You said you'd be home at... And immediately, the two are in contrast. Respect, yes, respect someone's time, but understand that a man, as he gives his time, how his wife views that time. No, I'm not giving permission to come home an hour late, but how you view that. Man, you're a hard worker, but thanks for coming home when you could. Feels respected. Love is, men, cutting out an hour early, coming home and making her the most important thing of your day. Most important part of your day is your wife. What about the way you think? Reading from Nina Rosner's book here, she shares a brief story. Crystal sat and looked at the questions for the assignment and drew a blank. 13 years had gone by, and literally she couldn't remember why she married her husband. 3 children graced their lives, and she and David were busy parenting, busy with work, and generally exhausted. But pen in hand, she pondered the question, why did I marry him? What 5 attributes or strengths were reasons enough for you to marry your husband? 13 years was a long time. She paused. She wrote, intelligence, number 1. She remembered the moments when he had impressed her with his business knowledge. Good with kids, she wrote for number 2. She smiled as she remembered the little boy in the apartment next to his that David would play with on Saturday mornings. Passionate, she wrote number 3. As Crystal remembered their first kiss and the first few years of their marriage, she started to laugh, remembering how they could barely make it up the anyways. Adventurous, she wrote. Next, thinking of the long drives they took and how he never wanted to eat at the same restaurant twice. Responsible became number 5. Crystal found herself smiling as she remembered her friend Joanne's complaints that morning about her husband not paying the electric bill and how their power had been shut off, but looking at her own husband and how responsible he had been with their own bills. She said, he was worth marrying. Beloved, wherever you are in your marriage, and you're wrestling with, I can't love her, I can't respect him, whatever it is, I would encourage you, go back to why you married him, why you married her, and you will find the reasons to love her, find the reasons to respect him. All right, those were the first 2, those were the longest. Now we race onward. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. But you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. All right? So even our relationships with our parents, our relationships with our children are biblically mandated. All right? Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, bondservants, that is employees, be obedient to those who are your masters, those who are your employers, according to the flesh with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart as to Christ. You say, my boss isn't fair. That's all right. Obey him as if he were Christ. And you, masters, do the same thing, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. Do the same thing. If you are an employer, treat your employees as if they are Jesus. That's your employer-employee relationship. And then the fifth and final relationship. Paul says, finally, brethren, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord in the power of his might. Be strong. This is the crowning relationship. This is the climax of all relationships. And listen to how Paul describes it. Put on the whole armor of God, verse 11, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Listen to verse 12. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Wait. Right there. That is the operative line of this entire passage. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Relationship number one, between church members, flesh and blood. Relationship between spouses, flesh and blood. Relationship between parents and children, flesh and blood. Relationship between employees and employers, flesh and blood. And then Paul says, beloved, you don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Those aren't your problem. What's the problem? This fifth and final relationship, because we wrestle against principalities and against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. We don't wrestle. If you had a better boss, you would be the same person. If you had a better spouse, you would be the same person. We use this line. We use these lines to say, you know what? My wife makes me so mad. And it's impossible. It is impossible that she makes you mad. Your wife only reveals that, in fact, you are a mad man. You say, my husband, he exhausts he makes me so impatient. I lose my patience. No. Your husband does not do that. It is impossible that he gets into your head and does that. But he only reveals that you are, in fact, an impatient woman. And that's why Paul climaxes with this. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. If you had a better boss, you would still be a lazy worker. If you had a better wife that jumped at every word you said, you would still be an impatient or a mad or a... None of the other relationships, beloved, change anything. But this fifth and final, that's why Paul says, finally, brethren, I need you to know this, that you don't wrestle against flesh and blood. None of those other relationships are your problem. This one relationship determines the success of all the others. You don't wrestle against flesh and blood. Everything hinges on this. And Eugene Peterson points this out in his Practicing the Resurrection, his volume on Ephesians. The repeated phrase that redefines who we are in all the complexities of household and workplace is as to the Lord. Repeated 9 times. As to the Lord, as to the Lord, as to the Lord. And in the Lord 2 times. 11 phrases that link the way we understand our role. Not in terms of the culture, but in terms of the Christ. Paul says, look, this is where it matters. This relationship will determine the success of your church relationships. You have problems with other members. It's not their problem. It's not flesh and blood problem. It's this relationship problem. You have problems in your home. It's not because your wife or your husband or the both of you are just not, your personalities aren't mixing. It's because you have a spiritual problem. You have problems with your children, or children, you have problems with your parents. It's not your father's or your mother's fault. It's not your son's or your daughter's fault. It is your spiritual fault. You have problems with your boss. You have problems with your employees. Everything is contingent. Everything hinges on this line. You don't wrestle against them. Those are not the rub. The rub is this relationship against the unseen, the non-flesh and blood. Paul Paul jumps to 3 imperatives in these final verses of Ephesians. In verse 10, he says, be strong. It's imperative. It's almost Paul is shouting in the text. And then verse 13, he says, put on the full armor of God, protect yourself. And finally in verse 14, he's this climax, he says, please stand, take this relationship with Jesus so seriously. He uses 3 imperatives. What he does not use in the other relationships, he is now calling out with all the passion. As you read this, there was one context that seemed to make it come alive. I want to roll a video here. I want you to see this video.
Let them know. Leave no doubt tonight. Leave no doubt tonight. No doubt. They shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue. Not this night. Yes, not this night. Don't leave your wingman ever bail out on your brother. You help, you strain, and you just fight. Start fast. Stay on top of them. It's a game, lad. Let's have fun and go get us a big victory.
West Virginia coach before the bowl game, giving his team the locker room pep talk. This is Paul's war room pep talk. Come on, he says. He says, take a stand. Did you catch that line? Leave no doubt in the mind of the opposition that we have come, and we have come to win this thing. Don't walk out of here, Paul's shouting. Don't walk out of here like a pansy, like you're, well, we'll see how it rolls. No, walk out of here with determination, with purpose, that nothing will separate you from God. That you will win this thing. Relationship number 5 impacts every other relationship, beloved, and you can spend your life becoming a better employee, a better employer, going to seminars on how to be a better parent, or marriage counseling on how to be a better husband or wife, and everything will fall somewhat short as long as you continue to wrestle against flesh and blood. Paul says, no. This 5th and final relationship is what makes every other relationship successful. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of the darkness. This relationship is the most important. So my friend Joe Martin, if you've ever met him, he's got a book for you. And he shared a book with me, he shared a book with many of us, To Know God. We've got enough. This 5-day plan, Morris Venden, on how to become solid with God. We've got a book for you at the door. Every family, grab one on your way out of church today, because this, you want to know how to be a better parent? Know God. A better husband? Know God. A better employee? Know God. A better employer? Know God. And then Paul, in that war room, says, let's go. Let's leave no doubt, not any doubt in our marriage relationships, no doubt in our children's relationships, no doubt in our workplace, no doubt in our churches. Let's go out and be victorious. But how? Be strong. Put on the full armor of God. And at the very end, stand. That's it. There's a Connect card in front of you, in the pew in front of you. I wish you would pull it out. If you're a guest today, we want to hear from you. We want to send you a gift. If you need to take a next step in your commitment with Jesus, maybe it's like Livy and Maddie did today, and you want to prepare for baptism. Or you want to join a Bible study because you know you need that in your life. Maybe you need to become involved. You've separated Jesus from the church, and they're not. They're the same. Or you want to share prayer requests. Pull out that Connect card. Hey, if you have the church app, if you don't have the church app, go to Google Play or iTunes. Download Campion Church app. You can fill out the card right on the app. But if you don't have the app, you're welcome to use the physical cards, insert them as the deacons collect our tithes and our offerings. And here's the final line, beloved. We are at times confused. We treat games like they're wars, and wars like they're games. Inevitably, you'll be playing a game some sort of sports, and you'll remind somebody or be reminded yourself, hey, it's only a game, don't worry about it. It's just a game. But today we can't say that. Not today, not about this. Paul, if he stood here today, would not say, hey, it's just a game, don't worry about it. Whoever wins, it doesn't matter. It does matter. Who wins here determines not only our life here, not only our relationships here, but our relationships and our life for eternity. So let's go. Let's leave no doubt in the mind of the opposition that we are here to win. And let's commit with one emphatic voice. We will follow Jesus. We will be connected. I wish you would pull out your hymn. No, don't pull out your hymnals. Read the words on the screen, 319. Lord, I want to be a Christian. Lord, I want to be a Christian. I'm all in. During the closing hymn, Maddie and Livy are going to come right back up to the stage, and our Pathfinder director is going to pin them with their baptismal pins and give them their certificates. And then they'll walk out with me, and I wish you would greet them and hug them and wish them a fulfilled relationship with Jesus. Shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
more word. We're glad you've joined us today. You're always welcome to join us here in worship. But we want to be available to you. If you have a prayer request, we have a prayer team that are eager to be praying for you. If you want to connect with a pastor, ask a question. If you feel you'd like to help support these teachings being online, I want to invite you to contact the number on the screen, 970-667-7403, or the website. We'll put that on the screen for you. You go there, you can contact us, leave a prayer request, connect with us. We'd be honored to hear from you and how we can help you in your spiritual journey. But until next time, know that Jesus is searching for you.